We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromous. This is Byrne Power, coming to you on a beautiful blue day here in Tbilisi, Georgia. The weather's going to be warm. I hope you like warm weather. I do until it gets hot, and then I'm less enthusiastic. Well, we're going to do something. I've just had a few thoughts running around in my mind. One of them has been, without going into any details, I've run into another major roadblock in getting my stuff here. Maybe at some point I will explain what it is, but it's caused me to think about days in my life, days that have importance. You know, like sometimes just something happens in your life and you're never the same after that. And I thought we would do something called What is the Most Important Day of Your Life? And of course, you can add your own day. I'd be interested to hear in the comments what kind of day you had that was something very important to you, that was, you know, the kind of day there's a before and an after. The kind of day that you never forget. Sometimes that day creeps up on you in a strange way. It's like you don't notice it at the time. But that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the different kind of days. Before we do, I would like to remind you that evidently liking this channel tells the algorithmic deities that other people should watch this. So if you like this, that would be good. Subscribing, if you really like what's going on here on this channel, that would be good. And of course, you can help by supporting the channel, and I can promise you your support really does help me. And for those who give more than, say, $50 in one go, or do like $10 a month through PayPal, link below. There are about 10 hours of audio extras. I will have more that I will pass around to everyone soon. A few more hours worth. But everything takes time, doesn't it? Including whatever happened to how we got here, number 13. Well, it's halfway done. That's all I can tell you right now. And the events of the world have caused me to think, now how should I interpret this? And how should I interpret that? That's how life is. So what is the most important day of your life? Some people might say birth. Well, that's a pretty important day, because one day you're here, one day you're not here, one day you're here. And that's up there. Graduations of different sorts. Some people think graduating from high school or getting your various degrees, your various levels in different countries, that's important. Getting a doctorate, that would be a pretty important day. Although I've heard many friends say, so I got the doctorate and then what? Marriage, that I think is a very important day, the wedding in particular. Although these days, you find this kind of back to front relationship that was not such a thing in the past, say more than 50, 60 years ago. And the back to front is, it used to be people waited to get married, waited for sex, except for, they would slowly ramp up, so went the ideal. And then they would get married, and then, the wedding night, it's like, what's the point of the wedding night anymore, or even the honeymoon? These are just, what I see now is that people tend to meet someone almost as an introduction. They have some sort of close encounter of the physical kind, and then they're living with each other, but they don't really know what they are. I hate the word partner. Whenever someone says I'm a partner, I don't say anything. I don't display anything, but I'm just inside. I'm just dying. It's just like partner. How? Well, of course, it's to get around trying to say what you are. Whereas in marriage, you're husband, wife. It's simple. But partner sounds like a business transaction. Sounds like, I don't know. It's also. We're not going to go into all of that. I did that somewhere down the line in one of my other videos. But the wedding day, traditionally, for many people, I think older people in particular, is a very important day. And interestingly enough, the day is often remembered for what goes wrong, not what goes right. Because what most people say who get married, and I think this happens with graduations and other sorts of these celebratory days, is that it all goes by in a blur if it's going right. But it's what goes wrong that you remember. So I remember one wedding where I actually officiated the wedding. A very bizarre, kind of countercultural wedding in New York. I'm not going into that now. But I will say this. Someone baked a wonderful cake for these people. And we had to drive out from New York City to Long Island. And when we got back, when we got to the place of the wedding, the cake was destroyed by the vibrations of the van. It was in the back of a van with metal floors. It was just. But people ate it. I mean, and this group, not particularly civilized, was eating it with their hands and such. So, such is life. But that's a day to remember. The birth of a child, especially I think the birth of the first child. I mean, all births of all children are important, but for many people, that is definitely another line crossed. And, what is your experience with that? I unfortunately have never had a child, and I would have wanted one. But alas, it's not particularly too late for me now. But it is unlikely, we'll say. And then, of course, the death of a loved one is a very important day. The death of someone who's extremely close, family members, friends, parents, worst of all, children. And for some reason, there is a curse if your child dies before the parent does. Then there's something about that is hideous and almost can't be survived. Nevertheless, that can be an important day for people. The day you started at work at a certain company could be an interesting and important day, depending on, of course, the meaning of that work. That is, what does your work signify to you? If your work, the day you started at McDonald's, chances are doesn't mean that much. But the day you started, for instance, you have worked hard to learn a certain skill or a certain knowledge, and then you begin to put that professionally into work, and then that work becomes your life. Well, that's an important day. And that could be the day that is the most important of your life. The day you started work on a project. I mean, some people don't work in companies or in businesses. Some people work on projects. So it could be the day you started work on a book or on a house, to build a house. Or the day the book was completed or the house was finished. Although the problem with that is you're never quite sure when the finishing starts, because, in a way, it could be with, say, something like a book, the day you get the book in your hand. It could be with something like a house, the day you finally get your furniture in it, and it looks finally like you wanted it to look. But that could be your most important day for a variety of reasons. Or it could be the day you lost your job. Yeah, I've had a couple in my life of really bad job losses that were not normal. I've had several. I had one where the owner died, But that wasn't a particularly bad day. I have had one where I got fired. Without going into details, I have to confess I was shoplifting. And they caught me. And the reason I was shoplifting was because I thought the stuff I stole, put under my coat, whatever, was going to somehow complete me. But it doesn't. And of course, I'm always thinking about this with my library and my books and stuff, as George Carlin talks about. But, and that was a terrifying day. But it isn't the most important day of my life. There was another day I lost my job because in Alaska I had a manager at the radio station I was working at who allowed me to go on a 3-month leave of absence. And then he asked me to send him an email letting me know a couple of weeks beforehand when he was coming back. But I kind of suspected that something about that because I'd seen him do that before, and he fired the guy, and that's what he did to me. He used that. He actually wrote back and said, "How dare you think you work here?" Like I didn't have permission. But what was important about that was also the trip where I really discovered puppetry. A pretty important day in my life. So a journey could be an important day. The day you embarked upon or finished a journey, or came to a certain fork in the road on that journey. In a sense, that's really an allegory of life. Have taken trips, particularly the trips I've taken to work on my Gravity from Above project, looking into puppetry and art, and coming to a place within it where something really changed my life. And so that could be an important day, or the most important day. Or maybe the day your project, book, movie, invention, startup, whatever, your income failed. And as I was just discussing, when I lost my job, well, it was a calamity for a while. One thing I was grateful for, though, was that I was not a person who had a family with children to support. Because I think for that person to lose that job at that time in that way would have been terrifying. But I have heard of stories. A friend of mine told me a story where his father lost his job because he wouldn't do something kind of sneaky. And he actually went into the boss, and the boss said, "You're going to do this." And he says, "No, that violates my conscience." And he said, "You're going to obey your superiors here." And he says, "Sir, I have no superiors and damn few equals." And he walked out. His son remembered that for the rest of his life. The son also remembers how they would go down to McDonald's, and they wouldn't just buy a little hamburger, which they would because they couldn't afford big ones, but they would also stock up on the ketchup packets and suck on them because that was nutrition for them. So sometimes losing your job or having a failure of some sort, failure in a relationship, failure in love, which brings us to another point. The day you met your love, the day you met the person who, you knew this person was the person meant for you. And not in that cheesy rom-com sort of way, but in a deeper sort of way, just talking with this person, realizing this person has qualities that are quite fascinating, quite real, quite haunting to me in a certain way. But it can also be the day you lost your love, which I know from experience, those are difficult days. And they haunt you, sometimes even more than when you met. In fact, the meeting can be the most important day of a person's life until they lose that love. And these days, people, I think we've become so cynical that, I meet people who casually tell me, I have a new boyfriend, I have a new girlfriend, I have a new partner. As if there was no pain involved with losing the last one, or that this one has any meaning. And so people almost, in their minds, they harden themselves to the future loss, which they are going to create because they don't know how to commit to anyone. So, the day you lost your love could be very important to you, or it could just be another Thursday, depending on what's going on inside of you. What else? The day you get terrible news about your health. Well, that goes without saying. That's a day you're going to remember. Is it the most important day of your life? Maybe. Because maybe things were going, bumpy ride through life, but suddenly this, what it does is it distills life down to a pinpoint. Suddenly you have to ask deeper questions, which I think you should have been doing ahead of time. If that's the most terrible day of your life or the most important day of your life, you probably did something wrong before that to make such a thing so important, and to act as if, someday someone's got to, unless you die in a car crash or something, a war or something, you're eventually going to get a notice someday saying, you have this ailment. This ailment is, might be the thing that takes you out. So to be surprised about that, to me, but it could be, because maybe you're not ready to go. You're not ready to pass on. You're not ready to go to heaven. Well, probably not ready to go to hell either. Could be an accident that changes the rest of your life. And I do have one friend who, as a child, for some reason, he thought he could coast on his bicycle and ride it with his eyes closed. You can imagine what probably happened. And he has spent the rest of his life regretting that simple little decision and that massive accident that affected the rest of his life. I have another friend back in Alaska who, driving down the road, one side there's mountains, very steep. The other side there's kind of, there's one of the channels of a river. And in that channel there are often moose, and she was like just kind of looking over that way. Meanwhile, a moose comes down the steep section. I mean, literally, it's just like this. You don't expect a moose to come down there. Walk straight in front of her vehicle, and she'll be in a wheelchair for the rest of her life. An accident can be the most important day of your life. For some people, it's the day they discovered who they really are. I've had some moments like that. But not so much who you really are, because you already are that person, but who you are. That is, what kind of a person you are. But these days, I think more important is the day you realized how much you have deceived yourself. You thought you knew who you were, but the heart is wicked above all things. Who can know it? We often don't really realize who we are. We are always attempting to get somewhere. It's very hard to get there. And sometimes even when you do get there, when you get an award for being a great person. I mean, recently the thing that struck me with that whole incident with Will Smith slapping, might as well have been a punch, Chris Rock in the face, is that, and I think it was Denzel Washington who told him that, but he didn't understand. It's like the day, when you get to the top, what do you got to do after that but to go down? You know, what happens when you arrive at the top of a mountain? You can't stay there. You know, I've been up on top of some pretty tall mountains. Climbed a 10,000 foot mountain once. That was pretty amazing, pretty impressive. Good views, beautiful day. You can't stay there though, you have to go back down. And sometimes we get to the point where, you hit your peak. The day you hit your peak. The thing I was saying about Will Smith is, the day he gets his award for being the best actor is the day he ruins his career. That is the worst case scenario for hitting your peak. And allied with that is the day you hit rock bottom. For many people, it's not the day you hit your peak that's the most important day. It's the day you hit rock bottom. The day you no longer can climb. You no longer can sink. There's a great line in a Butch Hancock song that Joe Ely sang. And the song's called Fools Fall in Love. He says, "Fools fall in love. Wise men, they fall too. A wise man hits the bottom, but a fool just falls on through." In other words, all the way through the bottom. But sometimes you have to hit that bottom. Some people do fall through because what they've done in their life is so chaotic, so selfish, so narcissistic, that when they hit what should be the bottom, there's not even a bottom there, because they've spent so much of their life excavating it. But when you really hit bottom, when you hit an extremely dark moment, you can use that if you have a little bit of wisdom to start finding the way out. But then again, sometimes the days that are the most important are not days you had a hand in creating at all. The choices that other people make sometimes can change your life. And you may not know when that other person made a choice. I mean, obviously, your parents make choices. Your parents choose to move somewhere. You interact with that place. That's now who you are. You can never go back. But you had no hand in the day. You don't know when the day was. I remember when I was a child, I was born in Seattle, Washington. I lived 3 years there, which I have only 1 or 2 memories of. Then we moved to Honolulu, Hawaii for 4 years. And I looked at a photo of my life right before I left in Honolulu, Hawaii. And I was I have this one photo, it's like I don't have any shirt on, I have like shorts on, barefoot, and I'm with a girl. She's like this little blonde girl, she's like 7 years old, I'm 7 years old. I'm holding the cat. No, she's holding the cat, something like that. I have this one photo, and I look at the boy in that photo. And he just seemed the epitome of normalness. He got along with his environment. And then my mother met a man, unfortunately an alcoholic, decides to move to California in the San Francisco Bay Area. And my life would never be the same. Was that the most important day of my life? Well, it was certainly an influential day. But one thing I do notice is that I stopped talking a lot once I got to California for quite a while. Then I didn't have hardly any friends who were girls in my life once we moved to California. Things which would later prove to be very important as far as, setting up who I would become. What would I be like had we stayed in Hawaii? Radically different. Because of my interaction with that environment was very different than my interaction in California. Sometimes it's the large events, the good and the bad. The bad, obviously, right now, think of everyone's life who has been ruined in many ways, or are literally destroyed, physically annihilated, by one man's decision that he wanted another country to come back and to get rid of all the people who really didn't belong in that country. And often, one person's decision, one person who has a lot of control, can affect so many other people. But even the good events, when I think about the end of the communist era, the fall of the Berlin Wall, I thought to myself, well, that's really great. And then eventually the Soviet Union ended with the coup in Moscow, and I thought, that's really great. But I didn't think it applied to me much. But now I'm living in Tbilisi, Georgia. And I wouldn't be here had those large events not occurred. Had the large event of the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the communist era, had that not occurred, I wouldn't be here today, because there would be no way for me to get here, because it would still be a fortress in which Georgia was just inside of it, like many other places. So, good events, bad events, sometimes the thing that changes you. I remember once I asked myself about, there are hidden days. Let's do this. There are days you don't realize for years how a certain meeting with a certain person, a certain event, a certain thought you had changed you. So I remember in New York City, I lived there 16 years, which is pretty much 8 and 8. And in the first 8 years, and somehow it split very neatly, I was getting things done, but I felt like also it was very tough to get along. It was tough to, there were things that I could tell the city was getting to me. And I was ready to go. And I actually prayed. I said, God, if you want me to go, I'll even go back home. What do you want? Because I'm at the point now where I don't know what I should do next. And a couple days later, a friend of mine called me and said, hey, Byrne, I know someone who needs someone to live in their house and help them with projects. And I said, well, how much is the rent? And I said, there's no rent, it's free. And I said, okay, God, you don't have to tap me on the shoulder with you don't have to smack me to understand that this never happens. So that started my next 8 years in New York City. And that was the important part. That second 8 years, the first part was all just laying the groundwork. The second 8 years was the most important part. Well, one could argue that the friend calling me, but I tend to put that one on God. But here is where I suddenly realized at one point, around the time I officiated at this odd wedding, I was thinking, like, what an interesting life I've had here. And I was thinking about all the people I knew. And then I suddenly realized that most of the people that I knew who were a part of my life were all people that I met, starting with this one friend, my friend Steve, who worked at this art moving company with me. And how he introduced me to these other people who introduced me to other people. And I thought, when I first met Steve, he was an interesting guy. We had lots of interesting conversations. He's still a friend, he's in the Facebook realm, but I'm sure that if I was passing through his neck of the woods, we would enjoy talking to each other again. There's no problem with that. But I thought, you don't realize that a person you meet might just change your life. And there's no record of the day I met him. It's just simply a hidden day. It's a day that got hidden. And yet so much of what I am now comes from that final phase in New York City. because it opened my eyes. I finally came to conclusions about ideas as a result of the people I was meeting. It's much more complicated than that, but that is something to think about, which is why you should treat people well. And you should also, if someone says to you, and they mean well, you should do X. You should, if someone knows you a bit and they say, you should meet this person, and it's not just a casual thing, but they really mean you should meet this person, not just in a off-the-cuff sort of manner, then you choose to meet that person, and it's like a door is opened into new friendships, new ideas, new circumstances. So yeah, hidden days. Finally, though, I had a friend once, this was in my Jesus People days, and he gave his first sermon at this church I was going to, the church that kind of evolved out of this Jesus People group. And he was a young guy, he's probably around 22, 23 at the time. And so he was giving his first sermon, and the first thing he said is, what is the most important day of your life? And he said, it's the day you die, which I've thought about that for years. And the reason I think he said that, and this is also what he was saying, is that that's the day the story is over. You have until then to do something with your life. And of course, we never know when that day is coming. That is a day that, as I was watching my mother spent like 7 months sliding downhill to her death, it occurred to me the thing about death that's so different from birth. In birth, there's a clock. We know something has to happen around the 9-month point or else. And then when people watch their children, they notice things like their first step, or their first words, or the first time that the child flies in a plane, which is not such a big deal now because people fly more often, although who knows? Maybe for some children now will be the first time they got to go out in public without a mask, which is kind of scary. But dying is different. With dying, if a person gets sick and starts to fade out, as opposed to have an accident, then you never know when the last word is. You never know when the last drive in a car will be. You never know when to commemorate different things, because no one wants to, because everyone's saying, well, there's always this sense of it'll get better, this is the new normal, okay, now this is the new normal, and you go down and down and down, chasing that new normal, which ends up in the end as death. So, but there is no convenient way to die. I think death is kind of natural, but dying is not. Dying is terrifying. But when you die, when we all die, sometimes that, I think for most of us, will be the most important day of our lives, because that is when the book is finished. That is when everything that you can do has been done. Now, I'm not going to talk about life after death, which I believe in. But I am talking about our life on earth. And I do believe in the judgment of God. I believe that there is no way that a person who is really tried to, someone who's really a saint, can be compared to someone who is truly evil. And there has to be some reckoning. And you can decide which side of the coin you're on, but the truth is, you probably don't know. And a lot of people think, well, I did this good thing, and then you did this bad thing. For instance, you can go your whole life, I've often thought about this, person goes their whole life fairly unremarkable, but inside, desires are festering. And then one day they do something unforgivable. I'll just leave a imaginary list over here. You can put something in it. What does it matter, all the good things you've done then? I mean, but at the same time, we all do things that are just, if you get down to it, we all do things that are selfish. We all do things to bring the attention back to us. We all do things that we don't even imagine ourselves doing, and then we find ourselves doing it. And I do believe in the forgiveness of God. And I'm not one of these people who believes, if I die without, asking for forgiveness for the last thing or something, God won't accept me. I think that has nothing to do with anything. But some people really believe that. They get so afraid of that. But my feeling is that the day you die is the day of your reckoning. It's the day when we will look. So, for instance, there was that preacher, Ravi Zacharias, who had a great ministry, Christian ministry. Lots of people loved to listen to his tapes, go watch him speak, watch him on Christian television shows. And then, shortly after his death, came out what he was really like. And it was not pretty at all. It involved a lot of sexual abuse and, you think you know someone from the outside, but you don't. God knows the heart, but we sometimes don't even understand our own hearts. Nevertheless, had he confronted himself prior to his death, we would look on him differently today. We would say, there was a man who had temptations, surrendered to them, but in the end realized what he was doing. And maybe he should have been put in jail, or something should have happened. But it didn't. And so now, that's the kind of thing you can't recover your reputation from. It's like Bill Cosby, and I haven't heard anything from Bill Cosby saying, I repent of my sins. Because sometimes what happens is we get so involved with the darkness inside of us, the desires that we know aren't right, that we have no answer. And so we just see ourselves, this is who I am, and I'm not going to apologize. And we know that's not right, but we do that. Anyway, that should all cheer you up, but no, really, it should. Because if you live in the most meaningful, truthful, honest way possible, in humility, if you recognize you don't understand everything, if you recognize that there is a God, but even if you're having problems with that, I still say, live as though there is meaning. I think there is meaning, so I don't live as though there is meaning. I live that there is meaning. But the point is this, you have until the day you die. But when will that be? We never know. So think about it. Anyway, that should do it for now. I'm going to go back and enjoy my beautiful blue day here in Tbilisi. And thanks for spending time watching. And remember, Anadromous means swimming against the stream. So do that. swim against the streams. I mean, these days, propaganda is just such a headache. Am I the only one who gets a headache from all the propaganda? And then I've got people who will write comments here or over on Twitter trying to say, but you forgot to mention this, and what about this, and what about that? And don't you realize this is happening to this person? And it's not just from one side of the spectrum. I get different people with different thoughts, or I see Facebook stuff, and I'm just like going, I'm sorry. I don't think anybody really knows what's going on. I think we will understand it later. That isn't to say these aren't important days. Oh yeah, they are. And you should live that way. So, I'm out of here.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.